Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com, and today we're going to take a look at the new 3-rail O-scale CB&Q Phase 2 F3 A and B units from Atlas. The F-series of diesels that were manufactured by EMD are really some of the most well-known and famous early-era diesel locomotives that were ever made. And so for that reason, they're also very popular with model railroaders. And when it comes to O-gauge railroading, at least American O-gauge railroading, the F3s always hold a special spot because of the great F3s that were manufactured by Lionel in the post-war years. The most famous of which was the post-war Santa Fe F3, which Lionel started making around 1950. The real F3s were manufactured by EMD between 1945 and 1949. Now, during that production run, they made various changes to the F3s. Some of those changes were cosmetic, some were functional, and some were a combination of both. And those changes are known as phases. Now, I'm not an expert in the F3s, so I'm not going to go quoting specific changes that were made during each phase, because I'll probably get it wrong at some point. But suffice to say, there were 4 or 5 different phases during the F3's production run. And interestingly, the term phases was not a creation of EMD. They didn't think of these things in phases at all. The term phases was later created by rail fans to help them keep track of the various changes that were made over the years that the F3s were produced. So what we've got here is a Phase 2 F3, and these were manufactured between early 1947 and early 1948. Now, for myself, I'm not a very picky modeler. I'm sort of an omnivore when it comes to O-scale, but a lot of people really enjoy specifics in their models, such as phase numbers and road name specific details. And if you're like that, you may want to check out Atlas, because Atlas is very conscious of things like that. Unlike some other companies who may be content to just make one model and then slap a whole bunch of different paint schemes on that model, Atlas doesn't do that. They really get into the nitty-gritty details. And so if you haven't already, you may want to try Atlas, because I can tell you they really make some of the most wonderfully detailed models on the O-scale market. Anyway, let's go ahead and get the review started by going over some stats and facts on these models. And of course, these stats will be for the powered units that you see here. I don't have any of the non-powered units. The length of the A unit is 12 3/4 inches. The length of the B unit is 12.5 inches. The A unit weighs 4 pounds 3 ounces, and the B unit weighs 4 pounds 1 ounce. The A and B units each have about 1 pound of pulling power, and when you lash them up together, you get about 2 pounds 4 ounces of pulling power. The minimum curve needed to operate the A unit is 0.36, and the minimum curve needed to operate the B unit is 0.45. Now, packaged with these engines, you get some scale components that you can install on the engine if you want to do that. You can replace the O-gauge pilot with a fixed pilot that has a scale coupler, and then you can also swap out the back O-gauge coupler with a scale coupler. If you do that, it does increase the minimum curve. You'll have to have at least 0.72 to run these engines with the scale equipment installed. Under the hood, both the A and B units are powered by 2 flywheel motors. There's also a fan-driven smoke unit on the inside of each unit, as well as the electronics for TMCC command control, as well as Rail Sounds audio. And these engines have the updated Rail Sounds package, so you get some of those nicer crew talk sequences. There are a couple ways to operate these engines. The preferred method is to use TMCC. Now, these engines have TMCC, not legacy, so you can control the engines with either the Cab 1, the Cab 1L, or the legacy controller, but it's going to be the same no matter which controller you use. You have classic TMCC on board these engines. The other way to run these engines is conventionally with just a transformer and some track. There's lots of nice stuff to see on these engines, so now let's go in for a closer look. Starting with the A unit, let's take a look at the pilot. Right here, we've got some cast-in detailing. There's a nice step right here, and there's one on the other side as well. And then we've got this really good-looking separately applied coupler cut bar, and it's on both sides of the coupler. And then, of course, in the middle, we've got the big electro coupler that can be thrown from your TMCC controller of choice. Now, in the world of 3-rail O-scale, most of the time we have to be content with these big O-gauge couplers. But a lot of guys, including me, hate to see the big O-gauge couplers on the front of F units because it looks so unrealistic. And so for that reason, a lot of guys will actually remove the O-gauge coupler and replace it with a scale coupler. But when it comes to this Atlas model, you're in luck because packaged with the engine is a second pilot. And so what you can do is remove this moving pilot with the O-gauge coupler and replace it with this fixed pilot that has a scale coupler. Now, I'm planning on doing this anyway on this model, so let me go ahead and show you how it's done. Okay, so in order to remove this pilot and install the fixed pilot that has the scale coupler, we need to take the shell off of the engine. But before we start that, I want to point out that this is a one-way conversion. You can't go back if you change your mind. And the reason is because, as stated in the instruction manual, we're going to have to use a Dremel tool to cut off this little outcropping here that the O-gauge coupler is attached to. And we need to do that to make room for the fixed pilot. So once you do this, you can't go back. So make sure that you really want to do it. Now, for me, it's really not that big of a deal. Most of my freight cars and passenger cars use O-gauge couplers, and I'm going to be putting a scale coupler on the front, but really, I'm almost never going to couple something to the front of one of my F units because the look of the front of the F unit is really what it's all about for me. So I'm probably never going to use that scale coupler that's on the front, so it's not a big deal for me, but I did want to point it out before we start. Once you do the conversion, you can't go back. Anyway, let's go ahead and take the shell off of the engine. To do that, there are 4 body screws. There are 2 up here and 2 back here. That's all you need to remove to take the shell off, but you've also got these little ladders here that are each attached by a screw. I like to take those off as well because when we take the shell off and remove the truck, these are kind of delicate and I don't want to risk damaging them, so I'm just going to remove the ladders as well as the 4 body screws. I've removed the 4 body screws, so now I'm going to remove the screws that are holding these little ladders in place. And again, it's not required. I just don't want to damage these things while I'm handling the engine. Okay, with all that out of the way, now we can pull up on the chassis and remove it from the shell. And to do that, it's a little tricky on these engines. You kind of have to pry the shell apart a little bit and then pull up on the main part like that. Okay, now that the shell is loose, I've turned the engine back over and I'll just pull up on the shell. There's a black TMCC antenna wire that needs to be detached from the board, like that. And now I'll put the shell over here on this towel so it doesn't get damaged. And there's a lighting cable here that needs to be detached, like that. So now the shell is completely separated from the engine, and I'll put this over to the side so it doesn't get damaged. The next step is that we need to remove the front truck from the engine. So in order to do that, we need to get access to some screws that are under here, and to do that, we need to remove this section here that contains the 2 crew figures. So between the legs of each crew figure, there's a Phillips head screw. And we'll just undo those. And then it should lift out like that. Now we need to remove 4 screws in order to detach the truck from the engine. These 2 here, and then there are 2 more on the back side. So let's start with this one. Now when you remove these screws, there's a little plastic washer piece underneath each screw. Sometimes it will come out with the screw, sometimes not. There it is right there. Make sure that you get the little washer piece with each screw, and what I do is I just set it on the screw like that and then set the assembly aside so that I don't lose that little plastic washer. The back corner screw is the toughest screw to get access to, but it's not impossible. It just takes a little finagling. Okay, now that the 4 screws have been removed, the truck is no longer attached to the engine except for a few wires. So the next thing we want to do is to detach this O-gauge coupler from the control board. There are a couple of black wires that run from the coupler over to the board, and so we'll just disconnect that cable like that and set it aside. Now we're going to lift up on the engine and rotate the truck over a little bit. You want to be careful because you've still got some wires connecting the motor and the pickup rollers and so forth to the control board, but just rotate it over a little bit so you can get access to this area here. There's a Phillips head screw here, and we'll just go ahead and remove that. And now the pilot is nice and loose. Next thing we want to do is pull on these wires that go from the O-gauge coupler to the connector over here, and just pull that through like that. Now we need to get to the underside to undo the O-gauge coupler from the truck. So I'm going to get my little engine cradle here and flip it upside down in the cradle. And there's a little nut right here that attaches the O-gauge coupler to the truck. We need to undo that. Now, I don't have a small enough nut driver to fit around that nut, so I'm just going to use these pliers. But if you have a tiny little nut driver, that's the best thing to do. Okay, now that I've got the nut off, I'm going to turn this back over for a second. And going through the O-gauge coupler, there's a screw, which I can now see, and I'm just going to pull that out like that, and now the whole assembly should come off. And there you have it. So now we've got a truck with no pilot on it. The next thing we want to do is remove this piece right here. And that's easily done. There are a couple of Phillips head screws. You'll notice that I'm using a flathead screwdriver for a lot of this, and that's just because I think it's easier sometimes. And there's less of a chance you'll strip the screw. Okay, now that's gone. And there we go. Now we're ready for the fixed pilot with the scale coupler. So here's our fixed pilot, and it needs to be attached right here, but this little outcropping that the O-gauge coupler was attached to is interfering with its placement because the scale coupler box needs to go right there. So this is where the Dremel tool comes into play. We're going to take a Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel and remove this little outcropping. I don't want to damage the side frames while I'm working with the Dremel tool, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the side frames as well. There are 2 Phillips head screws that attach each side frame to the truck. Okay, I've removed the side frames, so now we've got unobstructed access to this outcropping with the Dremel tool. I've put this towel underneath the truck to catch any metal shavings that come off while we're cutting this off. So let's go ahead and get rid of it. Okay, I finished cutting it off, and then I used a metal file to get it nice and smooth and flush so that there were no sharp edges. And so the last thing I'm going to do is take some black touch-up paint and just go over it so there's not a big raw piece of metal showing on this truck. Like that. The paint's dry, and believe it or not, we're now on the home stretch. We're getting close. So what we're going to do now is attach the fixed pilot right there. And to attach it, we're going to use these little screws, and the screws that I'm using are the ones that were holding this piece in place originally. So that piece is gone, and now I'll put the fixed pilot in its place using the same screws. Just like that. And there you have it, our fixed pilot is now in place. I went ahead and reattached the side frames, so now we're going to pick the whole thing up and put the cradle to the side for now. And we'll lay the engine back on the track. And now I'm going to get the screw holes lined up so that we can reattach the truck to the rest of the engine, like that. So now here are my screws with the little washers on them, and go ahead and start putting those back in. The screws are all in and the truck is now attached to the engine again. So now we're going to replace that piece with the two crew figures on it. Alright, I've got the shell back in place, and I was careful to reconnect those wires that I disconnected earlier. So now I'm going to flip the entire thing over in the cradle once more and start putting those screws back in place, including the screws that hold those little steps in place. Okay, there you have it. Doesn't that look great? It's like night and day. It looks so much more realistic. Now, as I said already, because we installed this fixed pilot, the turning radius of this front truck is now greatly reduced. And so instead of the minimum curve being 0.36 for this engine, it is now 0.72. So if you don't have the room on your layout for 0.72 curves, obviously this modification isn't going to work for you. But if you do, this gives you a chance to give a much more realistic look to your F units. Anyway, now that we've done all that, let's move on with the rest of the review. Just in case you didn't catch a glimpse while we were doing all that work, here's a look at the truck side frames, and as you can see, they are very, very well done. And we've also got these nice little steps that are all around the engine. And then here's a look at the fuel tank area between the trucks. There are some nice hand-painted details here, and overall it looks pretty good. Up above that pilot that we did so much work on, we've got a nice crisp Burlington logo, and then some great striping work up above that. The door here doesn't open, but there is a separately applied door handle that looks really, really sharp. And then on either side of the operating headlight, we've got separately applied grab irons. And then there's an operating MARS light up here, operating marker lights on either side, and lighted number boards. And then up here on the windshields, we've got separately applied windshield wipers. As we come around the side, you can see that the area by the cab looks great. There's a legible builder's plate down here. We've got some nice cast-in details all around. There are separately applied metal grab irons on either side of the door. The door does not open, but that's typical for Atlas. There are clear plastic inserts in the windows, and as you saw earlier, there are two hand-painted crew figures inside the cab. As we continue to move down the side, you can see two of the four porthole windows that are on the A unit. Now, the porthole windows have clear plastic inserts in them, but on the other side there's black masking, which is nice because that prevents you from seeing the electronics inside the engine. We've also got this nice chicken wire screen that runs down both sides, and it is see-through. And then we've got the nice crisp Burlington logo here, as well as some nice cast-in rivet detailing. Toward the back, we've got another cast-in door, and there are separately applied metal grab irons on either side. And then at the very end, we've got some more of those separately applied metal grab irons. If we take a look at the back of the A unit, we've got some nice cast-in details here and on the other side. There are some separately applied grab irons and MU hoses down here. There's a dummy O-gauge coupler right here, and that's okay because the only thing this is doing is coupling to the B unit. And then we've got this nice diaphragm, and it is sprung like that. And then in the middle is a cast-in door with a clear plastic insert in the window. And once again, on the other side of that window is masking to prevent you from seeing the electronics in the engine. Now let's take a look at the top of the A unit. Starting in front, we've got a couple of nice separately applied horns, and then we've got some separately applied lift rings and some nice rivet detailing. Back here, the fans are very nicely done, and they do have free spinning blades inside. We've got 2 smokestacks, and those go down to that fan-driven smoke unit. And then on the back, we've got some more cast-in and separately applied details that look great. Here's a look at the underside of the A unit. There are 4 pickup rollers, 2 per truck. We've also got 4 traction tires, 2 here and 2 here. The speaker for the sound system is right here in the fuel tank. And then right here under the rear truck are 4 control switches. We've got the run program switch, and then there's a switch to activate or deactivate the sound effects. There's a switch to turn the cruise control effect on or off, and then there's a switch to turn the smoke unit on or off. Okay, so that takes care of the A unit. Now let's take a look at the powered B unit. The B unit is really almost identical to the A unit in terms of its features and details, and in fact that's why the B unit has the same retail price as the A unit. The biggest difference, of course, is that the B unit lacks a cab, but it does have a little door and diaphragm at each end, and then there are some other minor cosmetic differences. The A unit has 2 porthole windows per side, where the B unit has 3, and then the A unit has some chicken wire screen right here in the midsection, and that's not present on the B unit. But other than that, they're pretty much the same, and that goes for the inside as well. I mentioned this earlier, but just to make it clear, the B unit is its own separate engine. It's got its own control system, it's got its own sound system, it's got a fan-driven smoke unit inside, so you can run the B unit independent of the A unit if you want to. One thing that I want to point out on the back of the B unit is that out of the box, at least on the 3-rail version, there's an O-gauge electrocoupler that can be thrown from your TMCC remote. But just like on the A unit, if you want to, you can remove that O-gauge coupler and instead install a scale coupler. And in fact, Atlas packages one with the engine when you buy it. Now, as for me, I'm not going to swap it out because most of my rolling stock is still using O-gauge couplers at this point. But if you do want to put a scale coupler on the back of your B unit, you do have that option. Lastly, here's a look at the underside of the B unit. Again, we've got 4 pickup rollers, 2 per truck, 4 traction tires, 2 per truck. The speaker for the sound system is right here in the fuel tank. And then again, we've got the 4 master control switches back here under the rear truck. There's the run program switch, the cruise control switch, the sound effect switch, and the smoke unit control switch. Okay, the last thing we're going to do before we start these engines up is BF IMO, best feature in my opinion. The thing that I like the best about these F3 units is the space between the 2 units. The space between the diaphragms, or should I say the lack of space. You know, in 3-rail O scale, we have to be content most of the time with maybe an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch between diaphragms at best, and at worst, a 1/2 inch or even more between the diaphragms. And so the fact that these things are right up against each other and they look so great is a real treat for 3-rail O scale. And so that's why, in my opinion, the best feature of these F3 units is the space between the diaphragms. All right, now comes the fun part. Let's go ahead and start these engines up, and we'll check out some of the sounds and so forth, and then we'll take them for a spin. Okay, so when it comes to running a multi-engine consist like this, there are 2 ways you can go about it as far as legacy and TMCC are concerned. The first way is to simply assign the same ID to every single unit. And that way, when you start up that ID, it starts up every engine in the consist. The other way is to give each engine its own ID and then build a lash up or a train out of that using the legacy or TMCC remote. I have found that the best thing to do with these is to give each engine its own ID, because if you assign them all the same ID and start them up, you're going to get a doubling of all the sounds, because remember, the B unit is its own separate engine. It's got its own sound system. So if you give them all the same ID, you'll get 2 horns, 2 sets of crew talk going on, and it just won't sound right. So what I've done is I've assigned each of these units its own ID in my legacy remote, and now I have a train built with those IDs in it. So let's go ahead and start it up. Okay, first up, let's give a listen to the horn. And now let's try the bell. I don't know if you can see it very well, but these things have really good smoke units, and my train room is quickly filling up with smoke. Anyway, there are 4 different RPM levels, so let me go ahead and show you those. And last but not least, let's give a listen to the always controversial crew talk sounds. Now, it seems like I say this in every review these days, but I know there are a lot of guys out there that don't like the crew talk sounds. That's okay. You don't have to like them, and you don't have to use them if you don't want to. But I like them. I think they're a lot of fun. A lot of other guys like them. And I can tell you that when young kids come to see my layout and they hear the trains talking, they go crazy. They love it. And so in my mind, that makes the crew talk sounds a valuable tool to help get young kids into the hobby. And so in my opinion, that makes it worthwhile. Anyway, let's give them a listen.
How's that track look? Are we clear? Over. Affirmative, the track is yours. Over. Roger that. All clear. Out. Dispatcher here. You're cleared onto the main. Over. Roger that. All clear. Out. How's that track look? Are we clear? Over. Negative. Hold your position. Over. Copy that. Out. Dispatcher here. Please hold for track orders. Over. Roger that. Out.
Okay, we're just about ready to move it out. Now, ideally, I would want to pull a bunch of California Zephyr passenger cars behind these engines, but right now, I've only got one California Zephyr passenger car. It's made by Atlas. It's a fantastic car. If you want to check it out, I did a review on it a while back. I plan on getting more of them in the future, but right now I've just got one, so for today, I'm going to be using that car and then just a random mixture of other passenger cars from other road names as stand-ins for the California Zephyr. Anyway, let's move it out.
How's that track look? Are we clear? Over. Affirmative, the track is yours. Over. Roger that. All clear. Out.
Okay, that about wraps it up for this review. These are beautiful engines, which is what I've come to expect from Atlas. Atlas never puts out anything that is subpar, and of course, these are no exception. If you're interested in purchasing these, the retail price on the powered units is right at $500 a piece, regardless of whether you purchase the A or B units. And the retail price on the unpowered A and B units is around $220 a piece. And of course, if you go through a good Atlas dealer, you can probably get a little bit of a discount off that retail price. And of course, my favorite train store, Legacy Station, is an Atlas dealer, so if you're interested in these, give them a try. You can find them on the web at www.legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time. To discuss this model or any other O-Gauge trains and to meet other O-Gauge modelers, check out the O-Gauge Railroading Magazine online forum at ogrforum.ogaugerr.com. Starting with the A unit, let's take a look at the pilot. Right here, we've got some, I don't know what.